We live in a world of persuasion. Every day we are bombarded with messages that try to change our minds about something. And while some of these messages may be overt, many others go under the radar, employing tactics so sneaky and often subconscious that we don't even realize we're being persuaded. One of the most famous books ever written about the subject is Robert Cialdini's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, first published in 1984. In it, he details 6 key principles that can be used by anyone who wants to persuade another person. Those 6 principles are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Each one of them has been proven through multiple studies to significantly increase the effectiveness of a persuasive message. Persuasion isn't always a bad thing. For example, in his book, Cialdini gives the example of an Israeli kibbutz that used the principle of scarcity to increase food donations during a local food drive. By telling people there wasn't much time left to donate, they were able to double the amount of food collected. But persuasion can also be used for more nefarious purposes. So much so, in fact, that there is an entire branch of psychology devoted to studying how to change people's beliefs, despite them not even realizing it's happening. It's called covert persuasion, and it's the topic of today's episode of Wondrium. Before we get into the ways that covert persuasion works, let's take a look at where the idea of brainwashing came from. The term brainwashing was coined during the Korean War, when U.S. soldiers captured in Korea by communist forces claimed that they had been subjected to extensive psychological conditioning while in captivity. According to these soldiers, their captors forced them to confess to atrocities they didn't commit and made them denounce the U.S. government. At the time, the U.S. government denied these claims, but in 1957, a U.S. Air Force colonel named Philip J. Graham reported that American pilots had actually been brainwashed while in Chinese captivity. This led to the term brainwashing entering the public consciousness, thanks in no small part to the efforts of Edward Hunter, a journalist who wrote a book called Brainwashing, the story of the Chinese Communist program to turn Americans into communists. Since then, the term brainwashing has carried a negative connotation. However, the reality is that we all engage in this behavior to some degree every day. Parents brainwash their children into accepting certain behaviors and beliefs as normal. Schools brainwash students into acting a certain way around their teachers. And advertisers try to brainwash consumers into buying products that they don't need. Ultimately, the term brainwashing carries such a heavy stigma because it implies taking away someone's free will, forcing them to believe something against their natural inclination. So instead of brainwashing, which makes it sound like the process is quick and easy, psychologists prefer the term attitude change, which more accurately describes the difficulty and time involved in getting someone to change their beliefs. Covert persuasion is just one way to influence people's attitudes. In fact, psychologists have developed plenty of methods for changing people's minds. Some of the most common include classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning. Classical conditioning is what happens when an unconditioned stimulus is paired with a neutral stimulus until the previously neutral stimulus elicits an unconditioned response. A famous example of this is Pavlov's experiment with dogs, where a bell was paired with food until the dog started salivating at the sound of the bell alone. In covert persuasion, this concept is used by pairing a message with something else that creates an emotional response, until eventually the message alone evokes the same response. For example, an advertisement might pair a celebrity with a product in order to capitalize on the positive emotions people feel towards that celebrity. Over time, this positive feeling is transferred to the product. Operant conditioning is another famous concept in psychology. It was first studied by B.F. Skinner, who believed that behaviors could be learned through rewards and punishments. This means that if a behavior is rewarded, it's likely to be repeated, but if it's punished, it won't. This type of learning is how dogs learn tricks, and children learn table manners. In covert persuasion, operant conditioning is used to reward desired behaviors and punish or discourage undesirable ones. For example, a parent might praise a child for cleaning their room to encourage them to do it again in the future. But they might also take away their console if they catch them playing video games instead of cleaning. Finally, social learning is based on the idea that people can learn new behaviors simply by watching others perform them. This type of learning is especially prevalent in children who learn everything from their parents, like how to use a fork or what is considered polite. In covert persuasion, this concept is used by making the desired behavior seem attractive by showing other people doing it. For example, an advertisement might show lots of kids enjoying a certain cereal to make it seem like a fun breakfast choice. Now that we know some of the basic principles behind covert persuasion, let's dive into some examples. One of the most well-known examples of covert persuasion is the Milgram experiment. This experiment, conducted in the early 1960s by psychologist Stanley, explored how ordinary people would respond to being told to administer electric shocks to another person. The results were shocking. Most participants were willing to deliver painful shocks simply because an authority figure told them to. This is an example of how authority can be used as a tool of persuasion. And it's a lesson that advertisers use every day when they put famous faces on their products. By using someone that the audience admires or respects, advertisers are able to capitalize on the authority principle to convince people to buy their product. Another famous example of covert persuasion is the Stanford prison experiment, which took a dark turn when the people conducting it lost control of their fake prison environment. The study was designed to simulate a prison and see how people would react to being locked up and told they weren't allowed to leave. It quickly became clear that the guards enjoyed having power over the prisoners a little too much. They began making the prisoners' lives miserable and even resorted to punishing them for minor infractions. This shows us that our desire for power and social acceptance can make us susceptible to covert persuasion. If the guards felt so strongly about maintaining the appearance of law and order in the prison, they were more likely to listen to orders that went against their intuition. Finally, one last real-world example of covert persuasion can be seen in cults. Cults are groups of people who are totally devoted to a particular cause or leader. Members of cults are often cut off from the outside world and are only allowed to interact with each other. This helps the cult leader to control their followers' perceptions of reality. By limiting outside influences, the cult leader can more easily persuade their followers to believe whatever they want. In fact, cult leaders often use a combination of covert persuasion tactics to maintain control over their followers. They might use classical conditioning to associate themselves with positive emotions. They might use operant conditioning to reward desired behaviors and punish undesired ones. And they might use social learning to make their followers model their behavior after theirs. Covert persuasion is a powerful tool that can be used for good or for evil. In the wrong hands, it can be used to manipulate and control people. But in the right hands, it can be used to persuade people to adopt more positive behaviors and beliefs. One thing's for sure though, whether it's for good or for evil, covert persuasion is everywhere. From the advertisements we see to the friends we hang out with, we are constantly being persuaded. It's important to be aware of this so that we can better protect ourselves from those who wish to do us harm. If you want to learn more about persuasion, check out the Masters of Science in Marketing program at a university. The coursework includes persuasion, consumer behavior, and marketing research, giving students a solid foundation in the science of getting people to buy things. Thanks for watching this episode of Crash Course Psychology. This course was filmed at a studio and made in partnership with a digital studio in nature. You want to help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever? You can join our community on a crowdfunding platform.